could you give some of the folks that are maybe not quite as familiar with the concept of horoscope and astrology, just a brief explanation on how this all works?
So astrology and zodiac is basically a series of traits for each personality type. So the way I see it is that's sort of how the world revolves around, amongst each other. Each individual has what I like to call a sort of like a zodiac DNA, right? So not every person is the same. So a lot of it stems from the date of birth when they were born. And, as many of you know, astrology and zodiac signs has been here for many, many, many years, right? Dating back from way back then. So it's evolved over time, and a lot of it has, a lot of people use it in relationships, compatibilities and that sort. But as of late, maybe the past 1 or 2 years, I've sort of introduced the idea of sports and astrology. So, and how team fits and energies, how they match or do not match. And that's sort of where everything has come about.
Yeah, makes sense to me. I mean, if we're talking about relationship and compatibility, if you're a Cancer, how you fit with, I believe my wife is a Libra. You could tell me she was born in late December. I think she's a Capricorn.
Late December, Capricorn, yeah.
Capricorn. Okay.
And
I knew
then,
I had that right. Yeah. Yeah.
there you go.
Yeah. My sisters are Libras. They're early September. So when did you get into astrology? Was it did you just decide one day, I'm going to get into this and apply it to sports, or did these two interests happen kind of organically?
Yeah, pretty much organically. Ever since I was in elementary school, I would read the daily horoscope, look up my sign, and I started looking at traits and everything about my sign, right? And then I got curious of, who do I match with? Who am I compatible with? And I started connecting two and two here and there. But eventually it evolved into kind of understanding more about it. I do have an autistic brother who's 2 years younger than me, who's nonverbal. So, me and him would always have these little conflicts and, when we were younger. So I've always tried to understood him. I took a step back and kind of gave another perspective. Hey, what if I understand his sign? Is that something that maybe that can help me understand him better? So I started doing that, and I started reading up on his sign. I started realizing there's a lot of similarities to the energies compared to what I've read. And from that standpoint, it kind of grew into even more curiosity into everything. I started just analyzing just the people around me in a subtle way, and also the relationships I've been with and why it did work or why it didn't work. And there was just a lot of trial errors or whatever it is. And that's sort of how I gained my experience, quote unquote, and 30 years of knowledge and understanding and reading and even sort of that experiencing what's surrounding me. Even when I played sports, I started connecting pieces here and there, and I started analyzing other teams that we played against, for example, and I started just kind of realizing, hey, what if, just the what if, and then in sports and NBA in particular, it grew upon me around the 2017-18 season.
Okay.
I'm a Houston Rockets fan, where Chris Paul came into the picture, and a lot of people were saying, hey, it's not going to fit because he's going to be a ball dominant player with James Harden. But then I looked at their sign. Okay, Chris Paul's a Taurus, James Harden's a Virgo. You know what? I think it's going to work. But it was just a question, right? And sure enough, when I did my research and I looked up their whole roster, their whole team was compatible in a sense where I started kind of creating this theories, right? And, over the years, I've sort of refined some of those theories and made it a little bit to a point where everything started connecting. So that's sort of when it started, 2017-18 season, when I started creating my own database for astrology.
Yeah. Well, I'm a Warriors fan, and I can tell you that 17-18 series against the Rockets, I think they were up 3-1. I'm glad it didn't work out. It did work out, actually. I should say there are folks that say they probably would have beat the Warriors and likely beaten the Cavs had they stayed healthy. But Chris Paul's hamstring and all that kind of torpedoed thing. So it did work out, but I'm kind of glad it didn't. Unfortunately for you.
Yeah.
But you mentioned playing sports. So before we jump into your methodology and all that stuff, what sports did you play growing up, and when did you become a huge sports fan?
I've always been a huge sports fan ever since I started watching basketball. I was, a Rockets fan. Elijah one days when they won the championship in 90, 93, 94, 95 years, and that's kind of where, I started loving the sport of basketball. And then I started playing, Little League to high school, middle school, high school, even street ball, pickup ball. And from there, I've always knew the idea of what my sign was and all the players around me. I always had a knack of knowing the energies around me just because of my curiosity. And I've always sort of said, okay, if this sign is this, how can I relate to this sign? It was more about understanding the energy, right? Um, and it's always been inside of me. I never really talked much about it. It was just sort of one of those self things that I was just curious about and see how I would relate in a real life situation.
Hmm. And as far as you've already talked about your inspiration for joining these ideas, and it seems so straightforward, right? I mean,
Hmm.
relationships in personal relationships, working relationships, these all could be affected by folk signs. So why not extend it to sports, where that is basically another kind of working relationship, obviously with a lot more pressure than your average day job. But as far as your methodology goes, like, do you have a spreadsheet with all the players and their star signs, and are you kind of, you have a big whiteboard in your house where you're drawing all these lines together? I'd like to hear more about your process.
It's interesting because one of my best friends, who I'm very, very compatible with, loves sports. Around that 2017 year from to even till now, that we had many, many discussions about astrology, and actually that's sort of what helped me develop all these ideas and theories because the help of him. And that's sort of another aspect to it. It kind of brings the best out of you when you have energies around you that you feel comfortable with, and they absorb your ideas and energy so well that they can go ahead and translate it in a way that both of you understand, and that goes in coaching, that goes in especially coach player situations or even duo situations, tier one players in the team, everything in that mold, right? So yeah, it started in a database, a simple spreadsheet, Excel spreadsheet, put a single team sign. I did months and months of research and understanding, gathering detail information such as their sun and moon. I couldn't really get their rising because you need their exact birth time, but the rising is more like the superficial, the out layer of your appearance. So I didn't really consider that, but it's more like the sun moon quality, like the fixed mutable cardinal energies, and I pretty much laid it out into a spreadsheet. And I did, believe it or not, I did have a whiteboard where I did my, some, I guess, game planning, where I said, okay, what if this player was this player? Or we played some games and just put signs up there and kind of guess what team that the group of signs belong with, or if they're
Hmm.
even good or not. So that's sort of how we kind of came upon of like, okay, this actually works. If we can figure out, if you can give me five signs and without telling the player's name, tell me if they're good, mediocre, or bad, or whatever the case is. And we started
Okay.
we started doing it that way, sort of like a reverse. And we found a lot of interesting scenarios where, like, wow, you can't make it up, sort of like that.
Yeah, that's a good way to test your hypothesis, is like kind of a blind
Hmm.
test, right? I mean, if you pull up the 2017 Warriors or whatever, some other dominant team, you're like, yeah, of course their signs fit together. They're a great team. And then maybe the Pistons that won 10 games a few years ago, you're like, no, they're a terrible team. They don't fit well together. But I like doing it the other way, where you said you had the star signs without the names or the teams, so you were able to test that hypothesis that way. So I'm familiar with star signs, and then the Cancer, Libra, that kind of stuff. What are the When you say the sun and the moon, what are you referring to? What does that mean?
Sun and moon. So the sun is more like your core personality, right? And your moon is sort of like the reactive type of energy that you bring out. So when you combine them, for example, just because you're a Leo, just because you're a Cancer, they're not all the same. So you have a different
Mm.
variety of all these energies that you're linked with, right? But in sports in particular, I mainly just focus on sun and moon because, of course, there's a whole birth chart, right? But that's more into like a deeper personal type of, reading if you want to get into, stuff like that. But since we're talking about sports, I was trying to find something that's more broad to an extent where there's a common ground, right? And I don't want to make it too complex because if you start reading the birth charts each and every player, then no one's going to be compatible, right? So I sort of wanted to find out that sort of like that baseline a common ground where, okay, we can connect pieces, and this is simply for the game of basketball. Since there's 5 players on the court, they have to share the ball. How is that group going to connect? You know?
And where does the coach fit in? Because I've seen you mention the
Yes.
coaches as well on Twitter. How does the coach
Oh,
fit in with the five players on the court?
it's a big deal because if you think about it, just because it's synergy, I look at the analysis, not simple. It's not as simple as like, okay, these, as long as you have these signs, they're good or not. Of course, you have to consider every aspect: talent, skill, experience, even coaching. The reason why, because coaching is the head. They're the leader. You have to listen to the coach, right? So they're the one that sets sort of like that foundation, that culture, and it stems down from there, right? So you kind of get a feel of the energy of the coach and which players connect with that coach. So there's so many layers to an analysis, especially the synergy analysis, right? So at times you can have a head coach that's not compatible to any of the players, but the team is
Hmm.
still good because maybe, for example, the group of players, that what I like to call core players, the one that plays majority of the minutes or your star players, they are compatible amongst themselves, right? But there's also scenarios where maybe one or two energies can throw off the synergy of the rest of the team based on their influence, based on their usage, and skill set or experience or whatever the case is. So it's like a whole combination of all of these analysis put into one, and that's sort of how you kind of get that synergy. You know,
Yeah, that's
um,
fascinating.
yeah. So you have to know ball. In other words, you have to know basketball already to kind of get a grasp, because each and every team is different and unique in their own way. But
Hmm.
implementing the synergy strategy helps and kind of gives you that edge, because if you're drafting a player and you're choosing between two players, well, guess what? Pick out which is compatible to your star players. That's a start, right? Or which is compatible to your head coach if you plan to, see something more in the future, long term. So scenarios like that come up and questions like that come up where you can be like, okay, I think he'll be a good fit long term, or I think he could be a good fit with the star player and so forth.
Got it.